In this video, I'm going to do a complete process of one photo just to show how it's done in Adobe Photoshop Lightroom 5. You could spend any amount of time you want processing photos in Lightroom, but I try and get them over and done with as quickly as possible because I tend to have many photos to process at once. So as you can see here, this is a photo. Obviously, here we have the water, and here we have the sky, and here we got some lands. This is actually a scene from the Norfolk Broads in the UK that I took about 2 weeks ago. One of the hottest days of the year, actually. Though looking at this photo, you probably won't be able to tell. Now, I'm not aiming to make this photo look like it was taken on the hottest day of the year. I'm just trying to make it look as nice as possible, make the water look really smooth, make everything look really good. So the first thing I'm going to do is, because I'm in Photoshop Lightroom 5, I'm going to use the radial blur tool, and I'm going to get some details in that sky. So I'm going to use the tool on the sky, and then I'm going to edit the details in the sky. I'm going to bring the exposure down a bit and the contrast up. I'm going to change the highlights and the clarity and the shadow just so that I get some details in the sky, a bit like that. Okay, that looks really nice. Now for the water. Now I want the water to look really smooth and still, and to do that I'm just going to highlight the water, or as much of it as I can, and then in order to make it look really smooth, just reduce the clarity, and you can see here that it almost looks white, which is the effect that I'm intending to get. Pull the saturation up as well if you want a color photo. If you want it black and white, then changing the saturation doesn't matter. Shadows, put a few more shadows on. Highlights you can change a bit, contrast as well, and keep the exposure relatively high. This is a good way to fake a long exposure shot, is to, especially with water, is to keep the clarity down and the exposure quite high, and then you get this really smooth shot that you can see here. When that's all done, hit enter. Now, you might be wondering what I'm going to do with this little bit of land here. I'm not really going to bother too much with that, but I do have a load of other stuff here that needs to be changed. So the first thing I'm going to have a look at is the white balance. Try auto and see what that does. I'm not really liking it, so I'm going to keep it on as shot, and then I'm going to move on to the contrast. So just do that, just pull a little bit of contrast up. Just pull the contrast up a little bit. I used to go actually crazy with the contrast when I first started out, but now I don't tend to go too crazy. I'd say about 50 is my highest. I'm on plus 17 here, which is all right. Exposure you can either bring up or down depending on what it's like. I'm just going to bring it down a smidge. Highlights, I'm going to leave them there. Shadows, I'm going to leave them there. Blacks, change a bit. Whites, you can change a bit. Okay, now the clarity of the whole picture. Remember, I'm trying to keep the water look as smooth as possible, which is the whole point of using the radial blur tool and really reducing the clarity. By reducing the clarity of the whole pictures, you're going to lose details in the trees over here, which is what you don't want. And this is why the radial blur tool in Lightroom 5 is an absolute blessing. By pumping the clarity up, you're going to get details back in the water. So don't go too crazy on the clarity if you're after the same sort of effect that I'm after. Vibrance varies depending on whether you want a colour or a black and white image, of course, and what the actual theme is, or what the actual image is. And saturation also varies as well. I'm going to leave those two relatively low. In fact, I'm going to put saturation back down at 0, and the same for vibrance as well, just for this particular image. Now the tone curve, I've made a video on this, so if you haven't watched that, I recommend you go and watch that after you've seen this. So that's all done there. HSL colour, I'm not going to bother with this for the time being. Split toning, I'm also not going to bother with. Sharpening, noise reduction, not going to worry about any of this. I really don't need to do any noise reduction because this was taken at ISO 100, and if we zoom in, we can see is actually already quite clear and clean. Highlight priority is something that I often use. Remember, if you drag the highlight priority up, you're going to get a white border. If you drag it down, you're going to get a black border. Don't go crazy like this unless you want to create a telescope effect. Don't go crazy like this either, unless you want something to look like a nuclear bomb's gone off. Just keep it down a little bit. Just pull it down a little bit. Change the midpoint as well if you so desire, and the roundness, and also the feather. And the highlights themselves, I tend to actually keep at 0. Right. I've already processed some of these photos. I'm not going to bother with any of this. I've already processed some of these photos, and I know how these photos look best. They actually look best when they're in black and white and when they've got a really nice tone on them. So that's why in split toning I'm going to go up, and they actually look really nice with a cool or a cold sort of tone. Something a little bit like that looks quite nice. So I would say that that's actually pretty much my final image. I just want to go and change the highlight priority smidge. Looks right. I'm going to say that's actually my final image. Looks very peaceful. I know you can't really see the details in the trees all that much, but it looks alright to me. So that's the first photo that I'm going to do a complete process of in Adobe Photoshop Lightroom 5.